Eric Muadit, Muadit.com. Let's take a look at a stock here that has been showing repeated resistance every time it comes back to test a previous break level. And it's a simple strategy here where we see that if we take the, for example, on this weekly chart, take the weekly closing high there and this weekly closing high, you get a trend line. And that trend line break, that level became a level to watch, because you can see here there was an attempt to stay above that level that eventually failed, which the failure was in itself some type of confirmation that the stock was not very strong. It failed to hold above that red line there, the previous break point of the trend, and I'm talking about this trend line break right here. So that break of that trend line was being tested, and you can see that again we tried to move above that red line here and failed. The stock drifted lower on a week-to-week basis. There's also another trend line break. In fact, there's so many on this chart. If you take the same weekly closing low here and this weekly closing low, you draw a trend line. Should look something like that. Let's take a look at another example here. Take this weekly closing low and draw a line connecting this weekly closing low here close to this weekly closing low. You get a trend line, something like that. And you'll notice that once we broke through here, and again I'm talking about this break, this move, the stock would eventually come back to test the same level. So the same break point, if you extend it out, you can clearly see that this became a problem here. The stock tried on numerous occasions to move above the red line and failed. Eventually it rolled over, and even we can say that in the current market it's come close to testing that line and failed, and hence we are seeing another rollover. And recently, if you take this weekly closing low, this weekly closing low, and this weekly closing low, there's a trend line there, so somewhere around there, and you can draw a line from there, and you can see there was an attempt to stay above the trend line break that failed, and that failure to hold above that level in itself, once it moved back below that trend line, you can see that the stock has rolled over, confirming that that was a level it needed to hold above. Now one can say that if you take the current weekly closing high trend line, so for example if you take this weekly closing high there and a weekly closing high recently right there, you can see that the best way to look at this, in my opinion, is to simply draw a straight line. Should be something like that, and as long as the stock is trading below this trend line, one has to assume that the stock is not in play. So because of the multiple failures, one does need to confirm strength, and it is only when the stock finally moves above the trend line at some point in the future that one can assume that finally it might be ready to move higher. Otherwise, what we see here is lots of recent sell signals. In fact, if you take a look at the RSI, draw a simple line on the RSI, let's call it somewhere around here on the weekly RSI. This line so happens to be at about 61.8 on the weekly RSI. You can see here uniform activity above 61.8, which was a sell signal. Rejection at 61.8 was a sell signal here, and again over the last couple of weeks we've gone above the red line with uniform activity and back below it. So this type of action here, in my opinion, what looks like a double top recently at about 61.8 is also another reason why the stock is struggling right now. We see the stock that is now on a pullback mode. At some point in the future, what you'd like to see is the stock to move above that red line, or to move above 61.8 on its weekly, which is when maybe finally it might have enough momentum to move to the upside. Otherwise, right now I would avoid, or otherwise expect to see lower prices until it can clear the RSI resistance and the weekly price trend line resistance that we discussed previously. So until we can see a movement by both the RSI and the price above those two resistance lines, one has to assume that net this is an instrument that over time still does seem like it wants to probe lower prices. Eric Muadit, Muadit.com. As always, good luck, peace, and blessings. I see.